Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Ecoffee with Experts. I'm your host, Matt Fraser. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about beyond Google, how to perform SEO for other search engines like DuckDuckGo, Bing, and Yahoo with none other than Geoffrey Kerbis. Geoffrey is the Associate Director of Client Services and SEO at Silverback Strategies, a digital performance marketing agency headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. He has a bachelor's of business degree in marketing from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. And his goal is to create experiences that benefit both consumers and companies. Geoffrey has a gift for turning data into stories and making SEO digestible and easy to understand. Apart from being a digital marketer, Geoffrey is also a podcast host and personal trainer. Geoffrey, thank you so much. Welcome to the show.
Matt, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, no problem. Hey, so you've had an interesting journey so far. Who were you in high school?
That's such a wonderful question. And I've definitely given thought to this idea of how whom we were in high school has shaped who we are now. In high school, I was definitely a man of many hats. I was in choir. I was on my school's rowing team. I was a part of our homecoming and prom planning committee, right? Little bit of journalism. I like to try a lot of different stuff. And the idea of turning high school into almost a college junior experience where take advantage of the opportunities given and learn a little bit about yourself in each one.
Wow. That's interesting. So how did that affect you today and shape your direction that you've gone where you've ended up now?
Yeah, I think that one of the beauties of trying a lot of different things is you not only have the opportunity to determine what success looks like and determine what you are indeed good at, but at the same time, you are able to become familiar with the concept of failure. You're not going to be good at everything. You are not going to make the basketball team, or you're not going to always be the lead in the play or the choir or have the solo. Instead, becoming familiar with the idea of trying new things, learning your strengths, being accustomed to failure, and then learning where you can grow. And if things do still pique your interest and you might not be good at them in the traditional sense, how can you still participate in that field? What are the ways that you can investigate and allow yourself to become more involved in it and maybe not be the star of the show, but a good supporting player?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you point out that, we can't be good at everything. And it's so true. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And the only way you can find out what those are, I guess, is if you try a whole bunch of different things and figure out.
I've definitely noticed that we live in an environment where there's two things that are very much present. Specialization, right? Yeah. You do one thing, you see it with a lot of high school kids now, right? They only play basketball or they only play football, and that is what their entire life is. And then there's also the sense of guarding folks from the idea of failure in that sense. You want people to be as successful as possible, only feature success in their lives so that they grow accustomed to that concept. But that's not really realistic, right? Once you then get into the real world, those folks who have been coddled or have only done one thing tend to implode in some sense of the matter, whether that is their grades or trying to get accustomed to what the real world is like and maybe getting their first no. It's just one of the things that
must be devastating.
I know. It's definitely something that I worry for those folks. But at the same time, I like to think if you introduce these ideas of trying new things, being inspired, feeding curiosity, you're going to learn a lot of life lessons along the way.
Yeah. So what was one of your biggest failures and what did you learn from it?
Oh my goodness. What a great question.
I know I'm putting you on the spot right now.
Oh no, I love that. I love this question. one of my greatest failures. I definitely could pick from a lot of them, right? I could very easily say, hey, there was a course in college that I did not do well in, and I learned that, you can't just not study. I could say that, oh, hey, I didn't get a bid to a fraternity, which seems so superficial, but I ended up getting in one. But I'm going to use a story that I like to think about as being able to come into something not as prepared as you need to be. So when I went to Indiana University, I got the opportunity to audition for a friend of mine's show. He was putting on a musical version of Dr. Horrible sing-along blog with, if you're familiar with that, congratulations, you're one of the few. If you're not, it's A-okay. And he just said, hey, prepare a little bit of music and a monologue. So I came and I knew, okay, I have the music prepared, and I skirted preparing a monologue. And as I'm sitting down in a casting room with a large group of people who also look very similar to I do, which is what a surreal experience of realizing what typecasting is. I go into the room, nail the singing part, and then the monologue comes up. And I know from the instant I'm handed the monologue they'd like me to read that I did not prepare. What ended up happening, which was really nice, is the director, who was a friend, called and said, hey, you obviously did not get this part, but this is what I want you to do if you ever want to do this again. What ended up coming from it was a really great learning experience, which was I ended up taking a acting course at IU. I ended up being able to then use that to understand, like, hey, maybe acting is not the thing I would love to do, but I love public speaking, and gaining confidence in public speaking in that sense, and knowing even if you are super familiar with a subject like SEO, you still need to prepare that presentation for those clients. Or if you are lucky enough to be at a conference and giving a panel, you need to prepare that deck. Not everyone is just going to be introduced to go and do a MozCon, for example, and be up on stage and just wing the presentation. Even the greats like Rand Fishkin are going to put a lot of time, or Dr. Pete are going to put a ton of time into making sure that presentation looks amazing.
Absolutely. Both making sure it looks amazing, and also I am knowing their lines, for lack of a better word, from somebody in acting, knowing what it is you're going to say and the journey that you're going to take people on in regards to that amount of time that you're going to talk to them about.
Exactly. Yeah. It's definitely, there's a wonderful balance of, I think anyone can memorize lines, but it takes something very special, and it takes preparation to be able to know how to weave someone into your story of your presentation and make them leave thinking, oh, that wasn't just another speaker. That was something that changed my perspective on the topic as a whole.
Wow. So would you say that the experience that you had in doing acting has impacted your abilities and made you a better presenter today?
I think it definitely has helped. I think we're definitely made up of our experiences. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about is when it came to post-school, I had the opportunity to work for an organization called CEB, which is now a part of Gartner. And I was working in their sales team. And sales included calling or making a very large number of cold calls. Yeah. I was doing at first couple of months, right? I was starting off with making anywhere from 100 to 120 dials a day. Not only was I dialing, I was prospecting, all of the fun stuff. But then as I was going through first month, I noticed, hey, I'm not really reaching any sort of level of success that I would deem as acceptable. What can I do? What can I take from my previous experience and all that school that I did to be able to ensure that I'm reaching the folks that I need to reach? So I started thinking, okay, let's prepare even more. Let's take this idea of drawing someone in, you only have 30 seconds on the phone, into a story that hits upon their pain points really, really easily. So at first it was CEB at that time was doing a lot of human resources case studies that I absolutely fell in love with, the idea of succession management. So I would spend my nights reading about case studies and then go in. And if I caught someone on the phone, I'm going to tell them the story about how they're not prepared for succession management like they think they are. And it could end up costing them millions of dollars. And if I told you, Matt, hey, guess what? You're not prepared for succession management, especially in this environment today. And if you don't have that person being trained appropriately and engaged appropriately, it's going to cost you millions of dollars in the end.
Wow.
That's a terrifying story to hear. And so what I've then gone from, and I very much thank CEB for that training, is by having a foundation in performing, in sales, you start to learn a little bit more about presenting is not just telling your perspective. It is telling a perspective of yours that is actually engaging to the audience member who's there. The average CFO does not care about SEO. It is not what is keeping him up at night. I hate to inform your audience, but what is keeping them up at night is the idea that they are investing all these dollars in website redesigns, but the website's not being seen. So being able to then angle towards them and show how we could be increasing based off of a few smaller investments rather than redesigning an entire site, which could cost a bucket load of money.
Depending on,
it's one of those things that I've found, you mentioned in my biography, the idea of making SEO relatable. I think the work that I've done in sales previously, in marketing research, and data and analytics have all led up to being able to say, cool, SEO isn't just something small. It's not something that is, that should be overly thought of, right? Like, don't put your ego at the door and be like many SEOs and say, I'm the most important person in this marketing department. Instead, see how you can be acting within the function to lift up those around you and those you're serving.
Yeah. So this is very interesting. So there's so many questions I could ask you, but we talked about how you were in school and you were learning from failures and all, and these things, which brought us to your job that you were doing. How did you make the transition to learning about SEO?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question.
Several times. What was
what ended up happening? What ended up happening in this case was, after working at CEB, I had the opportunity to work within their executive advisors room, which is basically the folks who help come up with case studies and work directly with clients to be able to identify situations to improve their strategic planning. That got me in the door of understanding, I really love this strategy bit. Sales is fun. Sales definitely has that bit of fire and spark. And there's a lot of days where you're riding on highs, and there's some days where you're in deep, deep lows. But I love the idea of being able to talk to an executive and say, hey, this is the situation we've identified. This is what others have done. How could we do that here? From there, I realized that research is something that I love. Data is something I love. I had a really great opportunity to work with Anthem for a small period of time within their customer service area and doing marketing research for them. But I always had that small thing in the back of my head saying, I'd love to work in advertising. I'd love to work in digital marketing as a whole, and got my first shot with Barefoot Proximity, which is an agency based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, part of the Omnicom network of agencies. At first, I was just there to do data and analytics, but there was a need for someone in SEO. There was a gap within the network. We talked about succession management earlier. Someone left who was in charge of a very large portion of SEO for a very large client. We need someone to fill that hole. And I decided, going back to that idea of trying a lot of things and natural curiosity, I'd love to try this. I would love to be able to learn by fire and see what I can do. Luckily, it was a large client and we were successful. The strategies that I put in place were a new perspective of trying to prioritize things that were put on the wayside and becoming not just another SEO, but someone who was helping to drive the ideas of what a Fortune 500 company's website could do when they actually thought about prioritizing SEO and not just having it as a line item. From there, great opportunities come. If you have success in a space, doors open, and that allowed for me to start helping the organization pitch other very large organizations, owning accounts. And one of the things that, led me to where I am now is the opportunity to continue that ownership and continuing speaking with really smart leaders within their spaces and seeing how SEO can be a tool to help them unlock their KPIs.
Wow. Being able to convince people that SEO is not just a line item, but an overall strategy that you can implement. What were some of the ideas that you pitched in order to make that pivot for them and to convince them to sell them? Because that's what you're trying. That's what you had to do.
So there's a couple of different ways, right, of being able to do so. There is, I don't like to call them scare tactics, but one of the very easy ways is just to give a snapshot of what the environment looks like and what is currently happening. Being able to say, these are all of the things that you're currently doing that definitely would not be deemed best practice is one easy way. But that does not always strike with everyone, right? Fear is a tool that has to be used in a very careful manner because you can only use it so many times before you lose the trust of whom you're working with. Because if you keep on showing fear and you've already been hired and you keep on relying on that, then what exactly are you fixing and how are you making a better environment when you're receiving dollars from that client? Instead, I'm very much the person who likes to use the knowledge of my peers to gain a better understanding of what I'm walking into. For example, if Matt, let's say, given your background, I know you've worked in car dealerships before. One of the number one things on your mind, if you are owning a car dealership, is making sure you're having leads for folks who are actually interested rather than relying on foot traffic. There are more car purchases happening, or at least the awareness stage and the information seeking stage of a automobile purchase has changed drastically over the past couple of years. So if my number one goal is to make sure you get more leads, I want to build out a vision for you of how SEO is involved in every step of that process. It's not just awareness. How does it fit with your paid media efforts? Can I make sure that I'm setting up a phone call with your paid media team directly to see how they're interacting with your sales funnel and ensure that we're working together with our keyword research, with the content that we're making so it can be utilized by both parties to make us overall more efficient. And then on the other end of that, SEO doesn't just stop on a digital perspective. It's something that can be used to ensure that we are better understanding how we can be matching up with in-person sales efforts or traditional media efforts as a whole. I get very annoyed when I hear someone say, okay, well, we have the digital media front set. I've done my job. Your job doesn't stop there. There's ways that you can be more informative and using all the tools that we have, be able to help address a lot of the questions in the room and become more than just a search engine optimizer, right? You can become a true, well-rounded marketer who is helping lead strategy rather than lead one small bit of strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Brian Dice talks about that, becoming a T-shaped marketer, having a understanding of the other, having an understanding of the whole concept of marketing, but also having a deep understanding of your main skill set, but also having the understanding of how to tie it all together, how that relates
Absolutely.
to the other channels of marketing, as you allude to, paid. So in regards to SEO, so I'm assuming you obviously started thinking about generating it for this particular client that you took over for this department, thinking about strategy. And what part did content creation come in part of that strategy?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So in this instance, this was a client that worked both in B2B and B2C.
Interesting.
Very, very intriguing situation where content is very different based off of what product they're selling. So the first thing that happened was just getting a comfort level with the website as a whole. And that starts, I am a person who loves doing things by hand. I know there are 1,000,001 tools that can do a technical audit of your site, but I am someone who I've worked with it's now at 56-point technical audit checklist that I use that is really done a great job of allowing me to say, cool, I do use Screaming Frog, I do use Moz or Ahrefs occasionally, but then manual checks to be able to understand, how does this work? What does this do from a Google Tag Manager perspective? What's the interaction? If I click on this, what sort of information am I getting? And then working directly with a content marketer to understand, as we look at the funnel as a whole, what does each part of this site do as part of that funnel, and map it out.
Absolutely.
I think that if you aren't looking at a site from a mapping perspective of what is the situation and how was this site built in order to fulfill my client's needs, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're doing your client a disservice. You're not giving them your full self. From there, after identifying and seeing all the different types of content that were available and all the different subdomains that they had, it became then a very simple mapping activity of where do we want to spend our time optimizing? Where do we want to spend our time scrapping, where there might just be too much and there might be the paralysis of choice that is hurting not only your site from a crawl budget perspective, but from a user experience perspective. And then being able to then repackage pieces of content that maybe had been made, put in that bucket of maybe we get rid of them, but then have the realization of what other channels could utilize this piece. So it's not just SEO coming and destroying your site, but instead making it slightly more efficient. From there, one of the things that becomes a key part, and what I think where I think a lot of SEOs lose, is we're really good at the awareness stage, right? We love making people aware. It's why I know folks in SEO who brag about ranking #1 or I got that featured snippet. Those are the sexy statistics of SEO. But the even sexier statistics in my mind are, how do those match with the intent of the user? So part of that was analyzing SERPs, looking at the keywords that were directly attached to key pieces of content in my mind that were being underutilized. Being able to then work with our UX experts as well as our analytic team to find key metrics that could be boosted based off of that. We talked about leads earlier. If one of the sites I was working with used, this is going to sound terrible, they utilize PDFs as one of their main ways of giving information, which could be interesting, but they were underutilizing them. They were plain pieces of documents. They were dead ends in this situation. So instead, being able to make sure, hey, we're going to mark up this PDF for SEO because they can be crawled. It's just not a preferred route for Google. And instead, make sure that we are showing that this PDF does have life. Let's create UTM parameters in any of the links to show that there was an organic visit from a PDF that went back to the site to allow for you to understand, hey, that PDF is providing value. What we then ended up doing is just based off of conversation and saying, hey, this is the most successful PDF you have from an organic perspective. We've seen trends over the past couple of weeks looking at this data. Do you have a lead? Do you have your Salesforce leads marked? Cool. We want to send them all this PDF. What we're going to do is we're going to separately mark each of them with a unique UTM parameter to know that they opened this or they sent it to someone else who opened it. So we can then track the success rate. These sort of things may sound like, hey, Jeff, we're talking a lot about not SEO, but SEO was the influencing voice in the room of saying there's interest in this topic. How can we spread it? And how can we capture that data appropriately?
Yeah. How are you using the IDs in the UTM parameters or in the Salesforce? Were you using user IDs that were tracked?
So in this instance, it was a little bit more crude than that. We just came up with basically codes that we were putting on and text generators. But had an understanding internally of what that text generator matched up with. We're not going out and saying, hey, we're going after ABC company and their UTM parameter is ABC company PDF. But we did know, hey, if it is XY 2235, that's ABC company's PDF visit.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. So that's pretty interesting that you were able to leverage that and using data. It's data is so important, isn't it, to make strategic decisions in regards to marketing. And when you were obviously leveraging Google, because I know you've also been able to leverage other search engines. And what are your thoughts on, like, Google is, let's just be frank, Google is the kick-ass search engine of the day. I don't know, their market share is so high. They would have to internally combust in order to screw it up, in my opinion, because they've just got so many patents and they've made their product so good. But is there value in using other search engines, or have you been able to see those same things that you did with the data in order to leverage traffic from other search engines, such as Bing, such as DuckDuckGo, such as Yahoo?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I have taken a couple of different approaches. I would agree that when we think about the owner of search, there's a reason why when we say search, we also use the term, I'll Google it, right? Yeah. It is the person in the room or the organization in the room that owns that concept. There's an entire generation that doesn't remember the time of Ask Jeeves being one of the top search engines in the room. That when we had our first family computer, that was the search engine I remember using the most. Because talk about a great experience and something to joke about, that you had a butler finding the information for you that you needed. It was definitely neat. When it comes to the data, though, there's a couple of different approaches that I take, and I'll come back to it in the sense of, one, I think that it becomes taking a look at your organization's profile as a whole. And we talked about data, take a nice step into your organization's analytic provider. If you use Adobe, congrats. If you use Google, you're probably in the majority. Prepare for GA4. I just love giving people reminders of that. But one of the things that I always do is I like to take a landscape look of what is the user profile. Because in some instances, I will be honest, it is not worth investing your time into other search engines if the overall overwhelming majority is going to be from Google. We're talking, I've seen profiles where 99% of search comes from Google on some of these sites. But what I don't want that to be misunderstood and misinterpreted as is not spending any time at all in those platforms, because there is definitely value of making sure you are setting up your Bing Search Console identity, being able to understand how your websites, your competitors are appearing as far as SERPs and what is changing within those SERPs. It is very much a foolish thing to depend on one source of revenue. If you're an organization, why would you depend on only one channel if you are a search engine optimizer? With that being said, though, there's another entire conversation that we could have on the idea of, we talked about the profile, but we didn't talk about if the organization has international intentions or an international market, because then we have an entirely different thing we have to discuss, which is, cool, are you preparing to go into Russia? Yandex is going to be something that we need to talk about. Are you preparing to go into China? Well, Baidu is going to be the search engine, but we have to talk about how prevalent organic search is going to be as far as your marketing mix, because Baidu as a whole is mainly a paid search engine. And it's very tricky to rank. And it is slightly naive to think that your organic SEO is going to be the key to ranking there. Instead,
or the key to getting traffic.
The key to getting any form of traffic. Instead, let's depend on SEO helping to inform our folks on the paid media side instead. But make sure that we're still creating searchable content that is accessible over there. It's also gaining an understanding of utilizing the data on those users and better understanding how those users interact with your site. It's very interesting to see, we talked about Bing a little bit. Bing users, in some instances, have a very different behavior than a user of Google in certain industries. In certain industries, I've found that Bing users are much more they're the people at the party who won't leave even though you've stopped serving food. They're not committing in some instances to actually purchasing. And it depends though. And it depends on the SERP. This is why I found it so intriguing, especially in awareness phases. I've found that Bing users tend to skew data, especially around a very hotly contested metric, which is time on page. Time on page being, it's one of my least favorite things to have as a KPI, because depending on the SERP, you might only spend a couple minutes on a page, or you might spend your entire day on a page. That's why we're seeing Google introduce more and more of these expected reads. I just saw Barry Schwartz post something about he's seeing 5-minute read and 10-minute read, or less than 5 minutes on certain posts. But that's something that is great to know. And it's something to better inform the entire, not only your client, but your organization's marketing efforts for the client. If I have an understanding of Bing users are spending more time on site and less likely to buy, and I know we're putting marketing dollars towards Bing, and marketing dollars towards paid media on Bing, I might make the suggestion that we take away those dollars from Bing, knowing that we might have a better click-through rate or KPI fulfillment from a Google or from a YouTube, which is also Google, or a LinkedIn in this instance. It's making sure that we talked a little bit about having an understanding of each search engine, have an understanding, and as an SEO, take the time to understand what your users look like from each search engine. Because then when you're coming to the point of creating an editorial calendar or doing keyword research, you're not just mapping out for each piece of content that you're optimizing towards. You might be mapping out towards an entirely different audience based off of the search engine.
You might be even, absolutely. Yeah, that just complicates things too, because then you're thinking about, the different how do you manage that? Like, for instance, you're managing and optimizing a piece of content for Bing versus Google. You Google first, Bing second. Do you take a look at content and you say, well, I'm going to optimize this specific piece of content for Bing and this one for Google, depending on the searches that are happening in Bing versus Google, that this piece of content or this idea is being talked about more in Bing, but not in Google? Or is it similar? Is there overlap? What has been your experience?
Yeah, I think that it's very much not making a piece of content for only one channel.
Okay.
That could be that could be a mistake, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely making sure that you are going through almost a checklist of sorts. What is required for me to be able to ensure that this ranks on Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, Yahoo, whichever ones you prefer?
Yeah.
Excellent. What is the goal of this piece of content? Hey, we're trying to make sure this is in the mid-stage funnel of the funnel. This is a consideration portion. We're really focusing on maybe versus. So this gadget versus that gadget.
That's
excellent. Yeah. So if we're doing that, cool. If we need to optimize directly for Google, especially considering the helpful content update, we need to make sure that this is a personalized experience of both of said gadgets or widgets or whatsoevers. So we'll need to have experience. Is that a possibility given the resources the organization have? Let's use that as a consideration.
Yeah, if exactly. Because small businesses like plumbers, they're not going to probably have the bandwidth or budget or resources to even consider something outside of Google. Correct me if I'm wrong. Some of the other enterprises you're talking about, even the car dealership that I worked at, there's a big enough budget that they were considering, Bing and other such avenues of getting it out, because it's so competitive, getting a one up on the competition to get just that lead versus someone else.
And I would say if you're in the situation where you're working with a client who might have a lower budget, who doesn't have the internal resources to create content that is truly personalized. As of recording this, we have not seen the big hit yet from the helpful content update, but I have to say, I think it will be coming at some point in time. Especially given the verbiage that Google has been pushing as far as EAT as a whole. But what you can do is you can cover your bases with the basics. Going ahead, doing a search of the keyword topic that you'd like to do. Don't just look at Google, look at Bing, look at Yahoo, look at DuckDuckGo, and try to take the time to realize what are the requirements to rank for this piece of content. Is it, hey, for Google, the requirements are I need to have user-generated content included, or I have to have pricing included in this piece of content, especially for the services. That is guarded information for some services, because otherwise you're not going to have someone press the quote button that you have on your site. But if for Bing instead, it is making sure that you have the pros and cons, that's something that Google also really likes to have when you're doing consideration content. So maybe having it on both and understanding we can list our pros and cons of this gadget versus that gadget very easily. If you maybe in addition, it is, well, you actually have to have the product schema properly put on the page. That's a very low budget thing that you can do, and a very low cost thing. It takes very few resources. Let's do that. And then that hits a check mark on every single box of each organization. Look at the amount of time you have. Look at the considerations for each search engine and the SERP rankings, and be able to put that to use for yourself. So you're not just optimizing for your one channel. Because I like to think of it, Rand Fishkin put it really well. What's keeping Google from going after your industry, right? E-commerce is the one that's felt it the latest of seeing anything that's related to a product. There's now Google shopping ads. There is what I like to deem the over distraction of a SERP, where there is a location near you that sells the product. There are a variety of stores on Google that also sell it, that you can do shopping. You can also check out the paid media ads that are on the Google SERP.
Yeah.
How are you preparing for other search engines that might not be as hungry for additional revenue via paid opportunities?
Yeah. Because ideally, you know what's very interesting is the car dealerships got pissed off at some of the websites, like the car directory websites. Like there's one big one. I don't want to say names because I don't want to get us sued.
Sure.
Let's say a car directory website takes the inventory feed and then uses it and creates a place of value for people to come, and then takes over the SERPs. And ultimately they're using the car dealer's assets of their inventory. And it was too late. Car dealerships, they got duped, for lack of a better word, into doing that without, they ultimately should be charging these websites, these car directory websites, for the privilege of using their feed. Because without their feeds, they would not exist. But yet they kind of got taken advantage of, and then they're using those, and they're taking up the SERPs, and they're doing then they're charging you. Okay, well, if you want to be number one, then you need to pay to play, and you need to pay to be at the top of all these SERPs. But yet they didn't create that value until all the car dealerships gave them their feeds. And the point I'm trying to make is it's almost the same way, where we've allowed Google access to all of our websites to index and create an index database of all of our content in order to create value to the market and value to people. But then they come along and say, okay, we're leveraging your value and we're going to make money from it by putting all these paid ads.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we are now in a world where Google is paying Wikipedia for the privilege of using their resources, which is very interesting. But it also then, it would be lovely if Google paid all of us, right? Oh, sure. Cool. We would love to use your information. It would probably very much have to look like a Spotify deal, right? Where we're getting paid 0.003 cents per site page or search or anything like that per month. But what I think is important to remember is there would not be search engine optimizers if our goal was not to work in hard situations. If it was very easy to rank, then organizations would not be hiring out folks like ourselves to be able to figure out what could be done and how to gain that small advantage, and how to optimize against a Google versus only optimizing for Yahoo, which back in the day would have been actually a thing that could have been a very legitimate consideration when Google had less of the market share.
Yeah. Do you think that more and more do you think there's going to be that these search engines, alternative search engines, if you will, it's alternative because Google has the most market share, are going to continue to grow in market share and in users? For instance, here's an interesting thing. I don't know why, but Ahrefs has started their own search engine.
Sure.
I'm going, what the flip are you guys thinking? And from what I understand, Apple is thinking of getting into search. And Facebook is thinking of getting into search.
I'm a gigantic fan of the idea of, I think search is not going to stop growing as far as the number of providers. But I think depending on preference, we're going to see search become more specialized. We speak a lot about the concept of demographics in advertising, right?
Yeah.
This is the demographic we're advertising to.
Yeah.
I think in the very not so far future, we're going to start talking about the demographics of certain search engines. And there's one that you didn't even talk about, Matt, and that's TikTok. TikTok is one of the number one search engines for Gen Z, and it's not even close. We are, or at least
that's amazing.
My generation is in the place where if we were looking for an answer, we're much more likely to go to YouTube. to find the answer for certain things, which is dangerous in its own mean, but we're not going to even talk about that.
Yeah, we'll have to come back to that.
The folks that I know in Gen Z, if they were going to search for how to change your oil, they're going to look it up on TikTok. I'm going to look it up on Google or on YouTube, and the generation before me will look it up on Google or just know based off of hands-on experience because you've then learned it on hands to hand. If we aren't preparing for the concept of demographics of search, then you're also not doing your job as a search engine optimizer at all. The one other thing that I will add when we are thinking about this, and I love that you brought up Apple, is we are going to see more entrants into the field because Google has to make their revenue public. Everyone knows that. They are a publicly traded organization. And when you see the gigantic numbers that Google is pulling in from all of that advertising, then if I was Apple, even though I have more money than, God, I would still want a piece of that. And also, people talked about this when the Apple news was being rumored. But it is important to remember, if Apple is trying to continue its dominance of the US market, they are losing out on a gigantic opportunity of taking advantage of every one of these being having the default of using Apple search rather than Google. Because Google does pay for the right to be the default browser or default search engine for anyone on Safari. I would not be surprised if that changes if Apple was set to announce a search engine. And, I've been talking with my peers as far as we talked about, we can even talk about the concept of search and looking at things that you don't even consider search for, right? We could talk about Netflix and how Microsoft was involved in the ads part of that. And they're going to be using that data to help improve how they're serving ads on Bing and how they're serving ads on LinkedIn and all of that sort of stuff. But I would be very much thinking, if I was an Apple, search is a product that you have to create in order to have a revenue stream of advertising associated with it. And it's naive to think that Apple just wants to create answers and give another option. They want another revenue field in case
they want another revenue stream.
Something, in case something happens to the iPhone or Apple Music.
Well, why give that money to Google when you could take it yourself?
And there is the question of, I believe it is a gigantic number. I heard it was I think it was in the double digit, or not 8-figure, excuse me. I'm doing some math here. 11-figure contract to have search on be the default search engine for every one. Now that's what I might be misquoting. It might only be 10 figures, but that's still a ridiculous amount of money.
It is
that you don't have to put any R&D into having algorithm experts or, any person on staff to create that.
But you're also driving up the stock value of another company rather than your own. But I don't know. And the whole thing with like Google or Tim Cook with iOS creating a garden, if you will, or a wall around the iPhone because of, I think Tim Cook, I have no idea what he was thinking, but obviously he got pissed off. Maybe the Cambridge Analytical scandal or whatever it was, it caused him to think, wow, this is just too much. And let's give users the choice. I've talked with people about, is it really a play for privacy or is it really a play for profits for Apple and Google in regards to, Google has now pushed the date back. I could correct if I'm wrong. I can't even remember. I scroll my news feed. I know the date was pushed back to 2023, but then I thought I read an article that's even being pushed back to 2024 in regards to cookies not working because there's just so much at stake here in regards to advertising.
There's definitely
think that they're trying to put up a their own silo if you will, of being able to control their piece of the pie to advertise to people. Like, it's more in the guise of not really privacy for the user, but profits for the company. I don't know if I'm out to lunch or not.
I don't think you're off on that. I think that there's a little bit of both. Yeah. We do live in a world where I think there is this naive sense that we do have privacy and we can control it. But we also invite privacy being taken away from us every day for the sake of convenience. As much as you like to think, I always put it like this, especially in the Midwest, Kroger rules the grocery market as far as grocery stores. But one of the things that Kroger does brilliantly is their loyalty program is one of the better ones. You can get a very large discount on items if you plug it in every time you're at that checkout counter. And you can also get a large discount on gas for every $1 you spend at Kroger.
Oh, wow.
Great.
Wow.
But there is a naive sense of many folks that they're not giving away that form of privacy.
But they are.
But they are. You're plugging it in. Your privacy, you have a dollar value associated with your privacy. And that is one part of it. The other part of it is, yes, it's an additional way of being able to sell to someone, hey, our phone does this. Our phone gives you the ability to feel like you're not being followed around. Our phone allows you to turn off precision tracking on Facebook and Instagram when you're using those. It's a big selling point, and people want to take it up.
Absolutely, because lots of people are opting out, and it's affecting Facebook's market share and Facebook's share value is what I meant to say, because they are. That has been detrimental. And I don't know how Facebook's going to overcome it. Because they're in trouble. Like, that doesn't rocket science to read the, their stocks. Like, you just read the news and what's going on with them, and it is definitely had. And it's kind of maybe one of the weaknesses in their business model, that their only source of income was once, like, I don't want to talk out of the side of my ass, but sorry for lack of a better word, but like, their income is advertising, and now one of that was a weakness in their business model, and now that's being cut in some way, and it's like, whoa, we were riding it so good for so long, making billions of dollars, and somebody has come along and cut that out from us. So I don't know. I have no idea how Mark is going to fix it.
We'll see. I think everyone's really curious.
Yeah, it will be. So, it's been awesome having you here. I know that we could keep talking about more.
For sure.
I would love to talk to you about the aspects of DuckDuckGo and the changes that you've seen in search over the last 20 years. But I would love to invite you to come back on the show if you would be so kind. And we can talk on another episode. That would be awesome about those things.
Yeah, Matt, I definitely look forward to that.
Yeah. What's one big takeaway then from this episode you want our listeners to get from it?
Yeah. What I would say is take time to not only understand your clients' sites, but how your clients' consumers interact with the site via the various channels that are available to them. We talked a little bit about Yahoo, Bing, a little bit about DuckDuckGo and Google, but don't just rely on Google to be the entire signal of that audience base, because people have preferences and you need to be able to serve those preferences.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much. How can our audience connect with you online if they wish to do so?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at Geoff Kerbis. I'm always happy to take a DM or take a connection. And then if you are interested in terrible takes on sports mixed in with digital marketing thoughts, you can find me on Twitter at RunJeffRun.
RunJeffRun.
And
cool.
Yeah.
Right on. Hey, thanks so much for sharing that. And thanks. I really would like to have you back again. And it was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Right on.